Sure. My name's Sean Miller. I live in downtown Chicago. I also host another meetup group called The Bridge, which brings people together from across the aisle to talk about current events. I recently got my concealed carry license here in Chicago, so I went through that whole gun control process, the training, all of that, so I can speak to some of that, and we'll talk about that later. Okay. Well, first off, thank you, Garrett, for allowing me to present on this. This should take less than 15 minutes to go through. It's just about 6 slides to go through. And I appreciate that this is a passionate topic that people have really strong feelings about. Before we talk about guns, though, let me tell you what I think this debate is really about. In a democracy, we elect people, and they mostly do what the majority wants, but not always, because the Constitution carves out a handful of things the government simply may not do to you, no matter how popular it would be. 5 are in the First Amendment alone. The government can't establish an official religion or stop you from practicing your own. It can abridge the freedom of speech or the press, and it can't stop you from assembling or petitioning government to right a wrong. 5 things it may not do to you, even if the majority wants it, even if it would feel safer. And we defend those lines, especially when it's uncomfortable. We let people burn the flag. We told the state of Alabama it could not force the NAACP to hand over its membership list. We protect the speech we hate because the alternative, letting the majority decide which rights you get to keep, is far more dangerous than the speech. Now, the Second Amendment is one of those lines. So let me be clear up front about what I am not saying. I am not saying no gun law is ever legitimate. This right, like every right, is not unlimited, and there are reasonable evidence-based measures I support. I'll name them. But whether the government can ban a weapon that millions of law-abiding Americans commonly own, that's not a policy poll. It's a constitutional question. And a free people doesn't get to vote away a civil right just because a majority is afraid. So that's the lens I'm asking you to look through tonight. Not left or right, a civil right. And who historically has paid the price when we decide some people didn't get to keep it? So gun control has always disarmed the vulnerable. Here's the history we don't usually tell. Almost every time this country expanded gun control, it started by disarming the people with the least power. After the Civil War, the Black Codes barred freedmen from owning guns, so the Klan and ex-Confederate militias could operate freely. In 1966, Mayor Daley of my own hometown, Chicago, pressed President Lyndon Baines Johnson for gun control and worried out loud that, in his words, the non-whites are buying guns left and right. Something has to be done under this gun law. In 1967, California passed the Mulford Act, which, backed by the NRA and signed by Ronald Reagan, specifically disarmed the Black Panthers. This isn't a fringe reading of history. Frederick Douglass said a man's rights rest in 3 boxes: the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box. Malcolm X told Black Americans the Constitution already gave them the right to a rifle. And the Freedmen Bureau Act in 1866 guaranteed the constitutional right to bear arms to all citizens without respect to race or color. Now, the Supreme Court quoted that very language in McDonald versus City of Chicago, the 2010 case that held that the 14th Amendment makes the right to keep and bear arms for self-defense apply to the states. And today, the fastest growing group of gun owners in America is Black women. So when somebody tells you only dangerous people want guns, ask who's been disarmed every time the state got to decide. It has rarely been the powerful. Now, a well-regulated militia is in the Second Amendment. So let's talk about what the words mean. Because a lot of this turns on the reading of 1791 English through 2026 eyes. People hear well-regulated militia and picture the National Guard under heavy regulation. Neither is what those words meant. Well-regulated meant well-functioning, in good working order. A well-regulated clock keeps good time. And the militia was expressly not a select government force, as the founders distrusted a permanent standing federal army. And this was the intention of the Second Amendment. The Militia Act of 1792 required ordinary citizens to show up with their own musket. The militia was the people. And here's the part that the Supreme Court has settled. In its 2008 decision, District of Columbia versus Heller, the court recognized that the Second Amendment protects an individual right. Justice Scalia, writing for the court, said, nowhere else in the Constitution does a right attributed to the people refer to anything other than an individual right. The First Amendment's right of the people to assemble. The Fourth's right of the people to be secure. Same phrase, same document, same authors. It doesn't quietly become a collective right only when guns get involved. And don't take this as a partisan reading. Take this from Professor Jack Rakov, a Pulitzer-winning historian who argued on the side of the gun control side in this Heller case. Even he says a well-regulated meant the militia was in effective shape to fight. The militia was the reason it was written down. The people are who hold it. Even if the militia vanished, the holder of the right didn't. The First Amendment was written for pamphlets in town squares. We didn't lose free speech when those faded. We applied it to the internet. So there's a deeper reason, though, the Second Amendment exists, and it's not the one you're expecting. The founders had just overthrown a king. They wrote this right so no future governments could ever leave people defenseless. And the court has recognized that in history, tyrants, Heller says, take away the people's arms so that a standing army can suppress political opponents. Now,
Just
I know that can sound.
a quick logistical check. You're on I think you may be on the wrong slide.
Oh, I am. So
Okay.
thank you for that.
Yep, no
Thank you
problem.
for that. Sorry, my eyes are doing two things. So now I know how this can sound in a room like this, so let me be careful. This is not about anyone taking up arms against their government today. It's a principle, and it has never been a right-wing principle. George Orwell, the democratic socialist who wrote 1984, wrote in 1941 that the rifle on the wall of the working class home is the symbol of democracy. Hubert Humphrey, the liberal Democrat vice president, called the right to bear arms one more safeguard against tyranny. And the clearest lesson comes from the people who were disarmed first. The Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto who held off the SS for nearly a month with smuggled guns. So disarming the vulnerable has always come first. An armed citizenry is the last check on power. If you fear an autocrat with the military behind them, do you really want only his side armed? Would you hand your rifle to a regime you fear? Now let's talk about the gun that everybody pictures here. Assault weapon is a look, it's not a function. This is an AR-15, and this is a Glock 19, a handgun most people don't think twice about. They fire the exact same way, one round per trigger pull. The features and assault weapon bands target the adjustable stock, the pistol grip, the handguard. All of these are cosmetic and ergonomic. They don't change the caliber. They don't change the velocity. They don't change the rate of fire. This is not a machine gun. What's being regulated is how the rifle looks. Now, don't take that from me. Take it from the man who coined the term assault weapon. Josh Sugarman, in 1988, a gun control advocate, noted that the people's confusion between machine guns and semi-automatic assault weapons would only help build public support for a ban. The confusion between these terms was their strategy. Now, no army issues the semi-automatic AR-15. Soldiers carry select fire weapons capable of burst or fully automatic fire. The AR-15 platform is not exotic. There are more than 20 million in this country. It is the most commonly owned rifle in America, and 30-round magazines are the factory standard. To compare, the best-selling handguns ship from the factory also with 15 to 17-round magazines. So a ban here isn't pulling rare weapons off the street. It's outlawing the standard rifle and the standard magazine that millions of ordinary people already own. And the constitutional test was never whether you need it, it's whether it's in common use. The government doesn't get to ration the right down to whatever a bureaucrat deems sufficient. If you ban the AR-15 and you don't disarm the trained young man, You disarm the 60-year-old woman who can't rack a pistol, but can put every round on the target with a light recoil rifle. These bans fall hardest on the physically weakest. Okay. Most gun deaths aren't the shootings you picture. So now let's talk about the numbers. And honestly, because if we look at them together, the policy on the table for gun control doesn't fit the problem. In 2024, about 44,000 Americans died by guns, but 62% of those, nearly 28,000 people, were suicides. 35% were homicides, and this was overwhelmingly with illegally obtained handguns and concentrated in 1 to 5% of city blocks. And this was driven by a few hundred repeat offenders. Rifles of every kind, not just the AR-15, but all rifles, were only about 3% of gun murders. And the mass shootings we hear most about are roughly 1% of gun deaths. They are the smallest sliver, and yet they are the reason we hear very often for these bans. Now, here's the side of the ledger we almost never show. Americans also use guns to defend themselves. There are two government-linked estimates and here on the low end, the politically neutral Federal Crime Victimization Survey counts 60 to 100,000 defensive gun uses a year. And in 2013, President Obama had the CDC commissioned the National Research Council to review gun violence. And it reported that the estimates ranged from about 500,000 to more than 3 million defensive gun uses per year. Now, even if we take the lowest number here, the defensive uses still outnumber gun homicides several times over. And most of the time, no shot is ever fired in these cases. So if we're serious about saving lives, we start with the 62%, the suicides, the mental health, not with the rifle that only shows up in 3% of the murders. Now, gun control, let's see. So gun control actually, does it really hit the problem? Well, let's follow the guns themselves. By the Bureau of Justice Statistics, about 90% of criminals' guns did not come from the background checked counter that the new laws regulate. They come from theft, and they come from the black market. About 1% came from a gun show. And the violence itself is stunningly concentrated. In Washington, D.C., a few hundred repeat offenders drive most of the gun violence. In Boston, more than half of it happened in under 3% of the streets. This is a problem of a small number of known repeat offenders in disinvested neighborhoods using black market guns. Not of the law-abiding people, a ban actually will be disarming. And in a life or death situation, when seconds count, most people can't afford to wait the minutes, often many more, it takes for a police response. The FBI found that most active shooter attacks are over before the police can arrive. In Greenwood, Indiana, a young man with a legally carried handgun stopped a mass shooter in about 15 seconds, and no one else was hit. Now, it's easy to call for a gun ban from the gated suburb, but tell it to a person who walks home late at night through a neighborhood the city has failed for decades. Ban guns and the criminal keeps his. Gun control is often a privilege of people who already feel safe. Now let me close. Here's where I think we can actually agree. I'm not against every gun law. I think keep firearms from people a court has found genuinely dangerous, with real due process. Encourage safe storage. Waiting periods for somebody mental health, because that is what touches the 62% of suicides. And I'll go further on all of that than you might expect me to. But I'd ask you to hold on to one thing tonight. We already know how this works with speech. You don't protect the words you love, you protect the words you hate. And a right to self-defense is no different. It isn't measured how we feel when we're safe. It's measured by whether we keep it for the person we disagree with or the person who scares us. Gun control has a long history of deciding that some Americans don't get to be safe, but a free society doesn't disarm the people it fears. Thank you.
You all set, Sean?
Yep.
Cool. So I'm gonna just I did a was kind enough to share his slides in advance, and so um Sean mentioned that the people that are disarmed are often the most vulnerable, and he gave some good anecdotal examples of that. I'm going to give some examples in my presentation about statistical examples like that are more modern, that show a little bit of a different story. I also agree with Sean that assault rifles shouldn't be the focus, and the truth is most modern gun regulations focus on magazine quantity rather than on assault rifles. I think honestly, the people who probably passed that law didn't really know enough about guns to know know what they were passing. I'm sorry to like say that about our legislators, but they often don't really understand the laws that they're passing. They're too busy trying to fundraise, which is why I think that people should we should have like quota like taxes should basically pay a certain amount of money to get everybody the funding they need to do the advertising, give all the people equal access to a budget that get a significant number of people to support them and not have politicians spend all their time fundraising because it makes them not actually represent us and write laws. It makes them focus on raising money. But anyway, the next thing I'll say is that Sean mentioned his quote about 10% of guns were purchased legally. That was his source was an FBI source from people who were incarcerated for gun violence. So that's not the source across all purchases of guns nationally. It was specifically for people who were incarcerated and were incarcerated for gun violence. So just want to be clear on that because when I first saw that statistic, I'm like, that doesn't make logical sense. So I dug into it. So, and Sean nodded. So he's an acknowledgement. And by the way, Jason and Manish and Zen, we're gonna give questions, but I'm gonna go ahead and go through my presentation and then we'll open it up to questions. Keep your hands up because shoot.
Oh, I didn't have a question. I had a correction. I heard
Okay.
a lot of mistake.
So
Should I wait?
yeah, if you don't mind, Jason, just wait until after the presentations are over, and then we'll go ahead and give you the chance to make your correction. Okay?
Are you asking everyone questions?
What's that?
Does everyone get to ask questions at the
Yes.
end?
So at the end, everybody gets to ask questions. You just raise your hand, and you can raise it now if you already have a question. Feel free to raise your hand and get in line. And then we will let everybody ask questions by the end.
Okay, but if you don't have a question, is that frowned upon?
No, not at all.
Okay, thank
Yep,
you.
no problem, Ivor. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the Second Amendment because I think a lot of people just assume that the Second Amendment means that every living entity in America has the right to bear arms, which is not really what it meant, or even how it was used a lot of our country's history. So let's start to ask by what the Second Amendment meant back then, and what type of problem the Second Amendment was trying to solve in 1791 when it was passed. The Constitution had just been given new federal government major power over armies and the militia. And a lot of Americans worried that the government could weaken citizens' militia and rely on a permanent army instead. Guess what? That's what we're doing today. And the amendment was actually written in response to that fear. So the method was really simple. The method I want to pursue is simple, which is I want to find the root problem, and then I want to look at what the words meant at the time, and then third, I want to test whether our conclusion fits the whole sentence and the history around it. The conclusion that the modern justices, the conservative Supreme Court justices, have come to. An important point is that the historical question and today's legal rule are connected, but they aren't necessarily exactly the same question, right? Times have changed, and I think we can all acknowledge that. So that said, the root cause was before the Constitution, states actually had more control over their militias, and the Constitution moved important powers to Congress, and that Congress could raise an army, call out the militia, and set rules for organizing and arming it. So the states still chose officers. They trained the militia, and they had to follow the rules set by Congress. That created a concern, which is what if Congress ignored the militia, armed only the people that it liked, and made the states dependent on a federal army? Which, by the way, we are now dependent on a federal army. We really don't have much in the way of states' militias anymore. So notice what's at the center of this early debate. It was the immediate issue was not ordinary street crime. It was about the balance of military power between citizens, states, and the new federal government. So it doesn't answer every modern gun question, but it does tell us what the reason for the Second Amendment was, which is where this debate is focused is on the Second Amendment. So now let's slow down and try to translate these words into plain English. well-regulated, as Sean mentioned, does not mean no rules. It meant organized, trained, equipped, and working properly. We agree on that. It was a citizen force and controlled by the law. It was also wider than today's National Guard, but it wasn't just any private group calling itself a militia. It had to have a relationship with the state. So the people points toward individual people as the holders of the right. Keep arms means to possess weapons. Bear arms often had a military meaning, although it could also mean just carrying weapons. So here's the key. One phrase by itself doesn't like solve the whole argument. We get clearer meaning when we read both halves of the amendment together, the individual right and the public purpose, and I see them as connected. So there's a little bit of draft history that I think is useful, and it lets us see what the writers' choices were as they went along. Madison's first version mentioned the right of the people, a well-armed and well-regulated militia. Oh, not now, my baby. Daddy's in his Tuesday night event. I'm sorry. Uh, I can't do it now. So Daddy is presenting right now. So Madison's first version recognized the right of the people. Sorry. And people with religious objections to military service were mentioned as well. The House version said the militia was made up of the body of the people. The Senate shortened the wording, but kept the militia reason in the final text. So to look at what Congress actually did in 1792, it required white men ages 14 to 44, 18 to 44 to enroll and bring certain weapons and equipment. That links private possession of arms to militia services. So we also have to be honest about the history. The system was compulsory, heavily regulated, and unfairly excluded both women and non-white people. History can explain the design without making every part of that design acceptable today. So what's the conclusion that fits the evidence the most? First, the amendment names a public purpose, which is keeping a well-regulated militia. Second, the militia depended on citizens who could keep arms. Third, the text gives the rights to the people, not only to state governments. So put those pieces together, the strongest historical reading is that it protected an individual right to bear arms as a way to preserve a lawful citizen militia and prevent the federal government from disarming it or replacing it with a permanent army. But you have to be careful. That doesn't automatically mean that every weapon, every place, and every population is protected. Modern Supreme Court law also protects individual self-defense, especially in the home. That's the current legal rule, even though historians disagree about parts of the history. That's how it's been interpreted in the modern way, even though I would argue that, you know, self-defense in the home was not really the purpose or even the main driving reason that the Second Amendment was given. And I'm not even sure that it would actually have been agreed upon by the writers and people who abided by that amendment. So, or that voted on that amendment. So next is that there is absolutely no, and I found this really interesting, there is no OECD country that is government guns only. There are some guns that have, or some countries that have lower versus higher gun violence. So Japan has very low amounts of gun ownership in individuals, whereas Mexico and Colombia, there are a lot of guns owned by individuals. Um, so, let's see what else I wanted to cover. So the difference is really in how licenses work, where guns are stored, and why a person is allowed to use one. And so you can kind of get a sense here of the countries that have the highest and lowest tolerances for private gun control. Next, I want to talk about gun removal programs. Sean talked about how historically in the U.S. And even abroad, the people who were the most vulnerable were the ones that had guns taken away. Interestingly, his example of the Warsaw Ghetto talked about how even though guns were taken away, they managed to get them through the black market, and so they were still able to defend themselves in a very significant way. But that said, here are three pretty famous examples of government removing newly banned guns, and they don't all tell the same story. I'm just going to share the facts for what they are without any preconceived bias. So in Australia in 1996, there were about 660,000 weapons removed. Firearms deaths fell very quickly afterwards, especially firearm suicides. The homicide evidence is less certain, so I'm not going to say that it necessarily helped homicides, but the truth is that out of people who try to commit suicide, a very large percentage actually regret it if they fail. And so I actually would argue that while some people may say, well, anyone should be allowed to commit suicide, I kind of disagree because the people who are trying to commit suicide are doing it not because they really want to end their lives, but because they haven't found a solution to the problems that have been plaguing them in their lives. And I would argue we should take a more compassionate approach, and rather than letting them more easily end their lives using a firearm, we should reduce the firearm capacity and give them the mental health support. And that's where Sean and I will agree that the mental health support is a critical component to any kind of policy about guns, because to Sean's point, even though it's something like 1% of guns that are used, please, even though it's something like 1% of gun deaths that come from, things like school shootings, et cetera. I don't remember if I fact checked that one, but let's just assume that it's accurate. It takes a lot of, it creates a huge emotional toll when you realize that 30 or 60 children and a number of teachers that tried to protect those children's lives were killed by a mentally unwell person who got access to a gun. That's why there is a lot of action around gun control because of those situations. Even if they're a small percentage, it's a high cost of life. You're killing children that are 6, 7, 8 years old and preventing them from living the life they had. You're destroying the families that they were a part of. So it takes a huge emotional toll on people. So I think that you can't just dismiss it, even though I
Did
agree.
somebody say 6, 7?
So you can't just dismiss it because it is a very important situation. And if the other co-moderators or co-hosts can, pay attention to who the person was, I didn't catch them. So basically, the point is that I do think that lower gun magazines, et cetera, would reduce the kind of harm that happens from those types of situations. And I'm curious after we finish if Sean agrees with those types of reforms, and also the reforms of trying to make sure that the people who have guns are mentally well, and that we get mental health help for everybody in the country so that people don't want to commit suicide, because people don't want to commit suicide, generally for good reasons. They do it because they can't find solutions to the problems in their lives. And that's, to me, not a good reason. We should find resources that help them find solutions to the problems in their lives whenever possible. So next, Great Britain banned the most handguns after the Dunblane shooting. The government,
When?
did you guys catch him? Um,
I think he's lagging.
It's really hard to see
Linda, right.
because of the screen sharing, so we can't really see the.
keep the participants list up, and just if you could watch it specifically.
Who the
Um,
hell keeps doing that? Who the hell keeps doing that? Opening their mouth when I'm trying to listen. Who the fuck keeps doing that? Because it's starting to really piss me the fuck off.
Relax, relax. We're gonna keep an eye on who it is.
Yeah,
So
I can do that if you want me to.
It might be evil.
If you drop screen sharing, we'll be able to see who's doing it.
It's
No,
Ivor.
if you look on the participants list, you can see who talks.
It's Ivor.
Ivor is talking
Yeah.
normally. Are you sure
No,
that it was
I
him
think
that
I
was
don't think it is
disrupting?
Ivor. I am thinking it could be one of anonymous, such as KK or something like this.
Not me. I'm saying I can look out to see who is
Yeah,
interrupting.
keep an eye out. Keep an eye out, and we'll
Yeah,
all
thank
keep an
you,
eye out.
Ivor.
And if anyone catches them, then we'll remove them. So just keep an eye out. So
Yeah,
anyway,
okay.
I'm just going to put up an extra screen on my computer to make sure I can see.
Dhanyavad. So New Zealand's program, Great Britain, basically handgun crime didn't immediately fall, but I have to say that most people that I know in Great Britain feel like gun violence is not really a thing. We'll go through the statistics on it later. New Zealand's program was organized well, but officials didn't know exactly how many banned guns existed, and it's also kind of too soon to measure the full safety result. So the honest lesson is not that buybacks always work or that buybacks never work, but it depends on the situation. So next, I want to show in all the OECD countries, the most developed countries, what are the countries with the highest homicides by gun in out of the I forget how many OECD countries there are. I think it's 38 or 48. Um, let me see. 38. So basically, Colombia, Mexico, Costa Rica, and Chile are the top four, and then the US is the fifth. And if you look at the number of violent offense prisoners as a percentage of the total population of the of the total population of the country, Turkey is higher. But if I recall, the U.S. is the second highest in violent offense prisoners. So the prevalence of guns has actually created one of the highest homicide rates in the OECD countries. And I'm just going to look through one more time to be sure I'm right. Yeah, it looks like we are literally the second highest in violent offense prisoners as a percentage of total population. And while I did say that all countries allow guns, most of them restrict guns in a very severe and major way. And the only people that are allowed to have guns are those that have, it's a very small percentage of the population. And I should have gone through the exact percentage, but either way, basically we want to understand what the measures are measuring the violent deaths. It's basically intentional homicide per 100,000 people. And so different countries may count crimes differently, but homicide is a pretty comparable measure of deadly violence. As far as violent offense imprisonment, there are four United Nations categories, and it's converted into a percentage of the total population. So 100 prisoners per 100,000 residents equals 1/10%. So there was NRs like not reported because some countries didn't report all the information. Now, historical and legal sources are all given here. That said, that's really the end of my presentation. So I would love to hear questions from people. And now I will take off the screen share. And in the question part of the conversation, I will reiterate that every time you have your hand up, that's to introduce a new topic or question. Try to keep your comment or question to less than 2 minutes because we have a lot of hands up. We're going to move through kind of quickly if we can. And if you want to respond to what someone just said when they rose their hand and spoke, or they responded to that person, just jump in. Like everybody's allowed to jump in. We can, even with 38 people, we can have a very fluid conversation. Just don't talk over anyone and let the person finish. And once they finish, jump in. If there's two people talking, let the other person go first. And let's just stay polite. And with that said, I'm going to go ahead and let Jason ask his question or make his comment or make his correction.
Yeah, I got a few of them.
Just
This
one
is
at a
for,
time per hand raise, please.
oh, well, then it'll take all night. But anyways, for the
We have
first
all night.
speaker,
We're here till 9, Jason.
okay, we'll try. The first speaker saying that the popular vote doesn't have anything to do with the Second Amendment and you can't repeal it or whatever, that is not true. If you have a constitutional convention, you got 2/3 of the states deciding they want to end the Second Amendment, it can be done. Not that I'm favoring that, but it can be done. And the other thing is about the gun, that it's a look, it's not a function. That is incorrect because, for instance, with police officers and their armor that they wear, most of the armor can stop a handgun bullet, but not an assault rifle with full metal jacket ammunition. The bullets will go right through the armor jacket. So that's why it's not just about the way it looks. There is a function for these guns, and they do different things. And I just wanted to raise the issue about states' rights, and that's against the federal power. I mean, I keep hearing many people want to just say, well, we just should let the federal government decide. But the real argument is, should the states be the principal guide in these rights? Should the states decide these things, or should the federal government? So that would be an interesting problem to look into. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. And that was kind of my point, is that really the whole reason for the Second Amendment was to give the states the power to be able to override a tyrannical federal government. And so I think like without knowing that context, you really don't understand the whole purpose of the Second Amendment. And I don't know, like
Uh, sorry, but I got like a threatening message from Mike Counts.
You can send me a screenshot to my email, which I put in the chat earlier.
Okay.
So, it if was it a private message, Ivor?
Oh yeah.
So send it to my email. So,
Yes, I also got the message. I will also send it.
yep.
You know, you got Zoom bombers here, don't you? Right?
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
think these guys are good faith, to be honest, Garrett.
Ivor and Manish.
Not sure about Manish.
I'm here 100.
I'll send you a private message.
Why
Thanks,
is
go
Ivor
ahead.
wearing a mask?
I'm here 100%.
Wait, what's your email?
What's our email? Yeah, that sounds real.
What's with the mask anyway? This is a meetup online.
Sorry, it's fake. I don't know.
You can,
You don't know?
you don't know. Okay.
Yeah.
Looks like he's
Sounds real
having
to me.
tech difficulties.
I know.
John,
He's a Zoom bomber. So
from the start of the meeting, we
the
agreed to
best
be.
reason to have a fake mask is to not get recognized. So,
Yeah.
we're gonna keep going. Manish, go ahead.
Well, Garrett, do you mind if I respond to
No, go ahead.
questions? Yeah, so I heard a couple of different things there. Three questions. So first, I totally concede a constitutional amendment. You get a constitutional convention, and with 2/3 vote, you can repeal any of them. It's only happened once with the alcohol prohibition. It's never happened with any of the Bill of Rights ones. But yes, if that is the way we want to do gun control, if we repeal the amendment, then I will accept that. That's the way to do that. Regarding the states' rights things, that's what the recent 2010 McDonald versus City of Chicago Supreme Court hearing was about. And it recognized that through the 14th Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms was something that wasn't a state's law thing. It was a federal thing. And that in that case, it was a elderly black janitor who lived in a dangerous neighborhood and had been burglarized several times and wasn't allowed to own a gun in his own home for self-defense. And they ruled in favor of that and said you cannot ban handguns as a states' rights thing. And lastly, as far as rifles go, shooting through bulletproof vests, a AR-15 shoots the same velocity that a hunting rifle would in there. It is simply a rifle. It's longer barrel, so it has more velocity as any longer barrel would, but it does not. The AR-15 does not give it any new properties as far as velocity or anything else like that. It shoots the same 223 or 5.56 bullet that a hunting rifle would. So
yeah,
So you're telling me
I'll concede on the one.
Just to be clear, Sean, the difference is not about assault rifle or not. It's about handgun versus rifle. Handgun versus rifle, there's a very significant difference between which can pierce body armor, and rifles are better at it.
It's the length of the barrel. You have more length for the powder to push the thing. But like I say, a hunting rifle would have the same effect.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, Manish, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm just to reiterate something interesting that I'm reading into the chat that Paul raised. He said the Supreme Court have conclusively ruled that original intent isn't necessary, and many cases have been determined in a modern context. This argument is a red herring. And then he went to the quote: if by the statement that what the Constitution meant at the time of its adoption it means today, it is intended to say that the great clauses of the Constitution must be conformed to the interpretation which the framers, which the conditions and the outlook of their time would have placed upon them. The statement carries its own reflection.
I have a fantastic example if you want it.
Yeah, please. I would
Gay
very fascinated.
marriage in the United States was allowed based on the 14th Amendment, which could have no possible application back when the 14th Amendment was passed. The
Yeah,
Supreme Court has ruled repeatedly that original intent has nothing to do with the rights and the Bill of Rights.
yeah, totally. Yeah, good, Paul. I'm just liking to say what an excellent point you have raised. I think it was the best from all of the point. Yeah, so it is definitely truly fascinating to see, with the constitutional rights where we are today, via the handgun or the assault rifle. I definitely think that the handgun is a little bit more secretive compared to the assault rifle. You cannot carry around the assault rifle during the day. But with everybody will see it displayed, but you can carry the handgun around and
Try to
nobody,
finish your thought, Manish.
yeah, nobody would know that you are carrying.
Thanks, Manish. Ginny, go ahead.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, thank you, Garrett and Sean, for the presentation. The item that really affected me and rang home to me was about psychological help, mental health that we could give to citizens. And I think it should start from family and teachers from grammar school on to keep an eye on their students and how they are and detect and nurture and guide the children before they reach high school. That's when things could get really out of control. So I wish, and I've been thinking about this for many years, mental health. Um,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying. Anyway,
Yeah. No, I
that
think
really rang home to me, that
thanks,
item.
Jenny. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's super important. Like mental health is a huge issue, and it's been historically demonized as like anyone with mental health problems is the problem, whereas really it's anyone with mental health problems needs support and care, and we should be giving it to them rather than vilifying them for it, regardless
Right.
of what the situation is. There are
Yeah.
now many ways to help many, mental health issues, and we should be giving people the support and health they need. Unfortunately, because healthcare is not a right in America, a lot of people just don't have the money to buy the insurance that gets them the mental health help that they need. And some of these people, I see them in New York City, talking to themselves that clearly have like mental health issues, but there's no one like apparently to help these people get the help that they need. So, I agree with you, Jenny. That's near and dear to me and an
I
important
mean,
topic.
there's an old saying, it takes a village to raise a child.
It does.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah,
we really should focus our energy, our resources in that regard.
Yeah, I
Ginny and
agree.
I agree with you, and I think things like waiting periods when purchasing a gun are a good thing to
Yeah,
effective for that, as well as background checks at when you're buying something at a gun store to make sure you don't have a history of mental health, mentally defective, I think is the old term they use for it,
yeah.
or violent criminal convictions. I think all of that
Right.
stuff
And all
is
that should be much more mandatory if you want to use that
it
word,
is. I think it is in many states. I know it is in Chicago. I've gone through it.
But it's also not in many states. I'll look it up. But Dawn, why don't you go from Florida?
Thanks. Oops. I think that to what um, Jenny was saying, about the social
Right,
issues,
looking at me
and
like this.
I think that it's difficult to discuss gun issues without discussing the social issues, the social economics for the people that are affected. That's one thing. To what was said about mental health being the barrier to gun purchase,
Luan.
I think that would be an issue as well, because mental health is such a spectrum to it that we're going to run into problem of defining, setting the requirement level for which mental health and where are they at in the spectrum? Are they allowed or not allowed to have guns? I mean, just for example, you thought about
Don, please
autism, which
hurry
is
up. You're
common.
speaking very slow.
The autism and the ADHD and the bipolar, those are very commonly known ones, but they're very broad. So I know people who have bipolar and they can be very aggressive in their behavior, and I know some that are not. So I think it's going to be tricky. As far as the presentation earlier at the beginning, I think there's a lot of the informations are outdated. A lot of things have changed a lot since then. The environment for which for the last 10 years have changed so much that what was said decades ago or centuries ago, I don't think no is anymore applicable. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Don. I have to say, actually, researching this subject and learning about why the founders created the Second Amendment, basically the worry about a tyrannical government, made me think that more people in blue states should own guns. And if Trump doesn't step down at the end of his term, we should be using them. So, like, to defend our democracy. And I hope that Republicans would join us. And I'm not even a blue guy, I'm an independent, but I think that all of us should defend our Constitution, and I hope that the military will. But I will say a lot of military people with integrity have been stepping down because of the things Trump's been telling the military to do. And for those that don't know, the military is the only reason Trump didn't stay in office after his first term, because he tried to invoke the Insurrection Act, and then it was the military that told him he couldn't just stay president when he wanted to. And we know he's probably going to try to do that again. So we'll see what happens. Rick, go ahead.
So Garrett, considering that, do you want to give up all the guns?
No, I don't. I never said to give up all the guns, right? Like I defend people to have the right to have guns. I just think that we should be taking care of the mental health issues people have. We should be
Yep.
handling the socioeconomic issues that create crime. Like I had one person who came to me and said, black people cause more crime. And so I started researching that, and it actually turned out to be true. But then what also turned out to be true is the vast, very vast majority of that crime was against black people. And
Yep.
so, really you have these people who grow up in inner cities where might makes right, and we don't really have rule of law. And I think we need to solve that problem. Like, I don't think, it's ultimately guns that are the problem. I think it's the people wielding the guns that are the problem, and we have to help them be
Yeah.
healthy, well-adjusted people. And then I think we wouldn't have as big of a gun problem. So it's not the guns that I think are the problem personally. It's that we need to have people with good mental health that have guns and that want to defend democracy and what I would really call freedom, rather than what passes for freedom today, which is often my team is winning instead of actual freedom. That said, I want to let Rick go, unless other people have things to say on that. Go
Garrett,
ahead.
can I agree with
Yeah,
you on that and go
sure.
further and say, well, yeah, I totally agree with you that a lot of the violence we see, a lot of the homicides we see is from poorer areas, disinvested areas. And I
Hmm.
think there's stuff to do in investing in those areas and having violence prevention programs and having, you know, workers who can go there and de-escalate things and not necessarily armed police at all times. But having a focus on those areas is what's going to drive the violence down, not necessarily disarming the whole, city of Chicago when it's a specific neighborhood that has this problem. So it's the mental health aspect. It's having, things in case for, safe storage being encouraged, so that we don't have accidents at home. There's all sorts of different things we can do to lower the amount of gun deaths.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sean. And for the liberals that don't like me for saying what I said, because I often do side with liberal perspectives, but you have to look at this country's like litmus test for guns, and you look at the number of people that say, "Take my guns away from my dead, my de cold dead hands," right? Like, and the NRA has so much power. There's certain times where you just have to pick your battles, and ultimately, I actually do believe that the Second Amendment was a really good thing to prevent a tyrannical government from taking place. And the question is whether or not like armed state militias could actually fight against a federal government. And I don't think they could, because we don't really have armed state militias. But anyway, I would actually like to see the states have enough like power to be able to confront the federal government. And, right now I don't think they do. But Rick, go ahead. It's really ironic the switch between Republicans have always been the states' rights people, but now that they have all federal power, they're all federal power people and they're anti-states' rights. It's very fascinating to see someone switch their quote unquote beliefs very quickly when they get certain positions of power. So, yeah, sorry, Rick, I didn't mean to go on. Go ahead, Rick. You're on mute if you're talking.
I was trying to talk. Thanks. Yeah. By the way, in California, the National Guard here is 1,500 people, so that's about one for every 100,000 citizens, and there that would not be feasible. One thing I was going to say, when I was studying this topic years ago, what really struck me was like Federalist 46, written by Madison, although at the time he was calling himself Publius. So if you think internet pseudonyms are something new, guess what? He was doing it, 250 years ago.
Hilarious.
But yeah, he was, who were the monarchs in Europe at the time? Catherine the Great, King Charles, of course, Louis the 16th. He was sort of progressive. Friedrich Wilhelm of Prussia, and I'll try not to bore you with all this, but near the end of Federalist 46, he says, notwithstanding the military establishments of the several kingdoms of Europe, which are carried as far as the public resources will bear, the governments are afraid to trust the people with arms in Europe. It is not certain that with this aid alone, they would not be able to shake off their yokes. So that's a double negative. But he's saying if they had guns, they might be able to shake off their yokes. But were the people to possess the additional advantages of local governments chosen by themselves, who could collect the national will and direct the national force, and of officers appointed out of the militia by these governments and attached both to them and to the militia, it may be affirmed with the greatest assurance that the throne of every tyranny in Europe would be speedily overturned in spite of the legions which surround it. So that was part of the context, I believe. I haven't studied a lot of the deliberations on the Second Amendment, but that one always struck me. And if you think that's old, it is fresh as a daisy. Like I'm thinking of like just even going back to the 60s, the turnover in Indonesia from Sukarno to Suharto. I saw pictures of soldiers walking down the street with guns and people cowering in their homes because they had no way to fight this takeover. Recently in England, a woman is in prison for 3 years for a social media post. So these issues are as fresh as a daisy. I'll just leave it at that. I've got another comment, but I'll save it for the second hand raising. Thank you.
Garrett stepped away. Do you think Luann should go ahead and?
She's been patient.
Yeah, I had, well, a lot of things. When I was a kid, a friend of the family was very fond of guns and had guns. And one night he woke up in the middle of the night and shot a bat that was flying around the room, and he killed it. And he immediately got rid of his guns because he said, it was a reflex and I could have killed anybody. At around the same time, by happenstance, I knew a child in the neighborhood who was 5 years old. He picked up a gun that happened to be lying on the coffee table, which was obviously inappropriate, and shot his brother because he thought it was a toy gun, and that obviously ruined his life. I do believe, and I'll add Japan to it. When Japan started to become fascistic, they not only banned guns, they banned people learning karate because people should have no self-defense. I absolutely believe that as much as possible, we should have it. And I believe that our government now is trying to take power away from us. It's just that it's a little tricky with the gun thing because of their base. But that's what I want to say is for the vast majority of people, what a gun does is it escalates. If you pull out a gun, it's a life and death situation, and suddenly the person you don't have any chance of de-escalating it. You don't have any chance of kind of backing off and letting the guy that's holding up the store leave. At that point, you've made a statement. And, sure, if you're Bronson or whoever you happen to be, it's pretty easy for somebody to take away a gun, especially if you're not really a gun person who really knows how to use guns and has been in situations like this before and had training. And a lot of people in those situations and in their house defense situations get killed by their own guns. I and a lot of the people, they weren't. Mentally ill people are usually not necessarily very violent.
No,
You know,
most are not. Yeah, that's true, Luann. But the people who are causing these school shootings, they are almost all mentally ill, right? Like anyone shooting
Yeah.
school children, like almost definitely mentally ill. So it's not so much, I'm not trying to vilify mentally ill people. They're like the very, very like high majority of mentally ill people cause no harm to anyone and really deserve love and compassion only. So I wasn't trying to say that mentally ill people are the problem. I'm trying to say that mentally ill people with guns might be a problem. Does that make sense, Luann?
okay, people with, I guess part of what I'm saying, people kill themselves with guns, and part of the thing I'm saying mentally ill, they're probably like sociopathic people who have been abused and had horrible childhoods, who have built up this sort of idea of what is going on with them on their own, and they happen to have guns available, and they kind of build up this thing around guns, and they want attention, and that's how people get attention. And that's what happens. And it's not the same as actually being mentally ill and you can get a pill for that.
Right.
It's something else. And apparently people don't notice that. Abuse is something that people are blind to an awful lot of the time. People in those kinds of situations, people are blind to. And that's what I say, that one of the problems with having a lot of guns around is there are a lot of guns around. So when these things happen, when you have this person who's going to be a shooter, or you have this 5-year-old, or you happen to wake up one day and you react without thinking, something horrible happens.
Yeah.
And it's a lot more comfortable if there aren't a lot of guns around.
Right.
Luann, well, let me agree with you where I can. I definitely agree that people who do own guns ought to be proficient with their guns. They ought to train with their guns. They ought to know how to use them and take it seriously, as you say. In taking, getting the concealed carry permit, one of the main things they told us was, you do not pull out the gun unless you are planning on using it. Is not something to be pulling out, to be brandishing, to be, having an ego trip or anything like that. It's not like the movies where you pull out a gun, point at a guy, and tell him to get down. You're only pulling it if your life is in danger or if you're in fear of great bodily harm. And so I think that there should be an emphasis on training, on instruction. Where Garrett and I might disagree a little bit on that is I think it should be easy for people. If you're able to get a gun, there shouldn't be like a poll tax where only rich people, where you have to travel like an hour out of the way to do it and it costs you $500 to get training. It should be fairly easy and accessible for people to do this so that they're safe with it, so that they're not accidentally keep killing people. Or I think you were saying, someone left a loaded handgun on their table and, a child or somebody picked it up and shot it. That's irresponsible, negligent manslaughter, as far as I'm concerned. And I think people who do that type of stuff should have their guns taken away, should go to jail. So I think we're in agreement on some of those things.
Yeah, I agree with that part, Sean, but I'll give it, if I could, Luann, I'll give another story of a family who there was a rifle like above the fireplace, and a man took down the rifle and jokingly shot a woman and didn't know that it was loaded, didn't know that it was active, and killed her. And again, destroyed his life for his life. No, I mean, like he didn't know, right? So it's the same. You can say it's the same thing, but like I don't know, like it becomes complicated. And but I will say to Sean, in the defense of the gun owners and the pro gun folks, I looked up the statistics about the number of people that die from like I forget what it was, like
Accidents?
it was between like accidents versus self-defense, and it's actually more people kill people invading their homes than die through accidents. Thank you, Sean. That was the number. And so I was actually sort of felt better about that. The thing that didn't make me feel better, well, I'll get to that when it's my hand because there's a lot of hands first and it's a new topic. So yeah.
Let me also just say that one of the main things they teach you is always, almost superstitiously, imagine that your gun is loaded. Always, every time, check to make sure it's even unloaded. If 5 seconds ago you thought it was unloaded, it doesn't matter. Check to make sure. So I, I feel horrible for that guy with the mantelpiece gun, but also should have treated it with the respect it deserved.
Ken, we'd love to hear from you.
Sure. So I'm gonna think I'll disagree with both you guys.
Go ahead.
A third
That's what free
position.
thinking is about, Ken.
Yeah, so I would say this, you could say, well, you look at the United States and then you look at the other countries that you presented, Garrett, in your presentation, and you see the difference in homicides. So you could do this in a fancy word, kind of like a multivariate analysis. So in other words, what are the various causes that would cause the US numbers to be relatively worse than, say, some other countries? And of course, one of the ideas that has been proposed is socioeconomic disadvantages in certain areas. I don't think that really holds that much water because you have not exactly the same, but you can have sort of similar disadvantaged communities in other countries that are not seeing that level of gun violence. So that can be a explanation, but I don't think it's a large persuasive one. If we're talking about laws, I also don't think laws necessarily are the answer. Partly because you have to remember the United States, there is no law that forces you to have a gun. It just says you can, right? Where in some of these other countries, yes, there's more restrictive. But if you look at, say, once again, some of the differences, I don't think the differences in laws are necessarily the primary factor in these differences in numbers. So what would I propose as being sort of the primary influence? I think it's culture. So when I lived for many, many years in the Lone Star State, Garrett, as you mentioned, everyone I knew had a gun. And these people were in like nice middle-class neighborhoods, gated communities. There's no real significant risk that they were going to be attacked, but it was a social thing. Everyone has a gun, so you get a gun. I remember this lovely leather shop where there were some lovely purses that my wife might buy. And in these lovely leather purses, they had a little place where you could put your handgun in the shop, right? So, okay, so you have that culture going on. So then if you go to, say, like Canada, well, what's part of the difference? Well, in Canada, I don't think I know anyone who has a gun, maybe a hunting rifle, but no one has a gun. And it's not a legal thing. And it's not a disadvantage. It's just a cultural issue. And that's why, Garrett, I don't think some of your solutions, like the legal ones, are going to work in the United States. Because for a law in order to be accepted, it has to, at some degree, reflect the culture of the nation. And I don't think those laws do. Because I think the culture of the United States right now is a pro-gun culture. Does that make sense?
Which laws do you think don't align with the pro-gun culture?
Like buybacks and things of that nature. I just don't
Oh,
think.
I was more advocating for lower magazine sizes, which I don't think really has anything to do with the pro-gun culture. You can have 30 guns, just don't have a magazine that has more than 10 items in it. I mean, if you can't hit a deer, Ken, in 10 shots, I'm sorry, but you don't deserve the deer. Let the deer run.
I
I mean,
hear
it's
you.
gonna run.
I'm
It's
really
gonna run after the
skeptical.
first shot anyway, so it's not like you're gonna hit the deer after the second or third.
Garrett,
I
we're the
agree. Hey,
country.
Garrett,
We're the
I
country.
agree with you in principle. I just don't know if they're really going to be, if they're going to work in the culture.
Garrett, we're the country of the big gulp and the super size. I don't know.
I understand, but big gulps of shooting school children is not where we want to be, and that's really what we're getting known for internationally is school shootings. Because I'll tell you, New Zealand had one school shooting. They bought back hundreds of thousands of guns. They haven't had one since, as far as I know. So, like
Yeah, but that's
while
such a
it's still,
because of the
well, let me
culture.
just
See,
finish.
the
While it's
culture
still
could
too
allow
early to
that.
tell, well, when you say they have a culture of buybacks, they had hundreds of thousands of guns in the country. So there were a lot of guns. Again, I'm not advocating for a buyback necessarily.
Sure.
I'm advocating for low numbers of magazine sizes so that you can't shoot 30 school children without reloading your gun, so that someone could bum rush you after you shoot 10 school children, which kind of seems fair to me. Once you've killed 10 school children, someone should be able to rush you and beat the shit out of you. I'm sorry for my language, but like at that point, like you should go down. Like,
Sure. I mean, the New Zealand case, though, is like it's a bit draconian to essentially, you have one incident and everyone who didn't commit the crime gets punished for it. This would be like if a drunk driver case, horrific drunk driver drives through a parade, kills a bunch of people. Okay, prohibition's back and we're getting rid of cars rather than
no,
having
not
stronger.
getting rid of cars, it's getting rid of certain types of guns that can cause significant unnecessary harm. Not all guns. Again, remember I said every OECD country has guns that are legal. It's
But I
just that
think
most of them don't allow large numbers of guns with large numbers of people. Only select people are allowed to have the guns. So again,
I agree,
I'm
Gary, but
not
one
even
last quick
advocating for
comment.
that.
When you look at New Zealand and some of these other nations, they're much more collectivist nations. They don't have that sense of individuality, which one of the things I love about the United States, but they don't have that individuality. And so you can do this culturally much more easily than the individualism that is so much in the United
That's
States.
that's not. Sorry to interrupt. I'm in Australia. I've lived in New
Thank
Zealand
you.
briefly. We're just as individual as you guys. What do you? That's ridiculous. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm glad that we have an Australian perspective to share here, Ken, because I do think that we have this idea of American exceptionalism that we're different than everybody else and, thus better than everybody else. But guess what? Like, to quote Monty Python, every one of you is an individual. And then the one guy
I'm
goes,
not.
I'm not.
Well, I'll tell you, that's interesting about Australia, but I will tell you, Canada's not.
I don't know.
Oh,
My
there's a
Canadian
couple.
friends are pretty cool individuals. So what can I say?
One's got their
Collectively,
hand
they
up
are.
too.
Let's go to Joe O.
Thanks, Garrett. Thanks, everyone. Quite a civilized conversation on this topic. I
Thanks.
appreciate that. Yes, also about the good historical summary. That was good. It's often a thorny part of this. A lot to mention, but I guess I'll just focus on this. The mentally ill aspect. Here's why taking away guns for mentally ill people is actually a subtle mistake. Because number one, it won't work. And number two, by doing that, that grants tyrannical authority to the government over all of us to a very extreme degree. Because the only way you can reliably determine who is mentally ill is through mass detailed surveillance. Now that may sound like Sky 5, but they're actually implementing it right now. And Melania Trump gave a speech about it at some point. I think it was in the past year, called for that. They're building data centers to do precisely that, and they're going to rationalize it by saying, well, we have to find out who's mentally ill to stop them from obtaining a gun. So that's the problem with that. And also all our attempts to stop people from getting guns, when has that worked? Essentially never. The US is what it is. It's not a place where that's going to work. Now here's another point about that. The current weapon that's the problem, it's not guns, it's drones. It's AI. Those are the new arms. And if we get into I don't know, trying to keep drones out of the mentally ill, we're overlooking a vast other ways of deploying drones. We need a free market defense against drones and AI. That's the only thing that's going to stop it. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it. If I can
I had
comment.
one
Go
small
ahead.
echo on that.
Sure.
One thing I kind of agree with you on, Joe, and I think we didn't quite get to red flag laws, and it's one area where I'm a little bit hesitant, is diagnosing people like say with depression and saying, well, you're not allowed to get a gun or something like that, I think becomes a slippery slope because some people, this is going to disincentivize them from going to see a psychologist if they think that they're going to take their guns away, if they're having a bad time or they need some help or something like that. So we have to be careful about the incentives of these type of things. I'm sure there's a way to do it, and if you're maybe schizophrenic or you have a violent history of mental episodes, that's a different story. But I can see where you're coming from, Joe.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone was saying, at least I wasn't intending to say, take guns away from all mentally ill people. It was more, um, I was trying to say, I think we should get mentally ill people the help that they need so that they can heal. And maybe during the time that they have certain diagnoses, they shouldn't have guns. But I think everybody, like most mentally ill, most mental illnesses can be controlled with medications, with other things. And if they're under control, then I don't see any reason that people shouldn't have a gun. Even someone with like, delusions, like should like, if they're perfectly like functioning normally, like there shouldn't be an issue. But the other thing I'll mention is, to your point about government surveillance, the government was, we had Snowden who said the government is illegally doing surveillance of U.S. citizens, and the guy had to run to Russia of all places to find safety because the U.S. government punishes all the people who point out when the U.S. government is doing illegal things. And that's been true under Democrats and Republicans, by the way. Even though I loved a lot of things about Obama, he was horrible to whistleblowers. We did another event on whistleblowers. Um, and the government is very bad to them, and we should really not accept that. We should be telling the government they should celebrate whistleblowers because those are the people that keep our country free and safe. Second is that ICE actually has more money than the FBI now, and they're also buying surveillance equipment. So the government is continuing to enhance its surveillance capabilities. So I think, Joe, unfortunately, your concerns are well founded there. And I agree with you that drones and AI are, if you use drones in the right way, they can be bigger and more powerful weapons than AI. If you look at the war in Ukraine, drones are really the weapon that's killing people. But I don't think the average person can create such drones, like not the average person anyway. Like maybe some people in their homes can do it, but not many. That said, if anyone else wants to talk on that subject, go ahead, and otherwise we'll let Paul go. Paul, go ahead.
So when we're considering changing the Second Amendment or restricting guns, we have to remember that we're not just setting precedents for today, we're setting precedents for the future, that future Americans will have to abide by. And we are all very lucky to exist around this time. Things are relatively peaceful now. We don't have to overthrow a government now, despite what people might think about Donald Trump. Um, the issue is that they will be necessary someday, and they will be necessary to stand up to tyranny someday, and they might even be necessary in states versus states, which I think is very, very likely, even in the next couple decades, whereby you have extremely blue Marxist states combined with extremely authoritarian red states. And as things develop, they may be necessary for the border of those states, which I think is very highly likely as the federal government continues to lose influence and power. There are many attempts by red states, even today, to take away federal power. And states like Montana and Idaho have actual laws denying federal supremacy when it comes to gun laws. They've been tested somewhat through the federal courts, but the intention is crystal clear. They intend to maintain the right to have these assault rifles, the right to keep their populations armed. And we don't know what's going to happen, down the 50 years from now. We don't know. It may be absolutely necessary for every citizen in this country to be armed in order to prevent a new tyranny or to prevent catastrophe or some things that might happen. And I think for that reason, mainly for that reason, I could never see any major infringement into the Second Amendment. Now, I am also on the side that wants some reasonable restrictions. I don't think a background check is a problem. I do understand that a hunting rifle that's a 223 caliber and an AR-15, which is also a 223 caliber, is exactly the same gun and does exactly the same thing. So your grandpa's hunting rifle is a
Finish
assault
your
rifle.
thoughts, Paul.
Oh, there we go. Thanks.
So, Paul, you said that there's no reason to overturn the tyrannical government, and you noted that some people may think so with Donald Trump. Do you think that it would be okay for Donald Trump to run again for another term as president?
Oh, of course not.
If he did, do you think that, and suppose that he succeeded and he ran and, or let's suppose he just didn't step down and he decided to stay in power, would there be a reason to overturn the tyrannical government?
I don't see it as a plausible eventuality. He did
I'm
not.
just asking, thought experiment wise, if it happened.
Well, the practicality is the problem here. How do
I
you?
mean, just answer the question.
Of course. I never said anything different, and I'm
Okay,
not.
no, you didn't want to answer the question. That's why I asked you to. And I want to share two statistics with you. About almost 50% of Republicans own guns. And actually, an August 2025 Data for Progress poll said that 53% of Republicans said Trump should run again in 2028. Is that news to you?
It's news to me, but that's what, 25%, if you assume statistical sampling, 25% of the population.
But the vast majority of the population with guns.
Okay. Well, are they going to step up and force him to have another term or protect him?
Trump
Donald
Trump
Trump.
Trump tried to not step down when he was elected last time. The only reason he stepped down is because the military refused
Hey
to
man, why are you guys talking about dump truck?
You said
they refused to allow him to invoke the Insurrection Act.
I fact
So
checked that. You're wrong. You're wrong. He
that
did not try to invoke the
that is,
insurrection.
you can go ahead and try to post a
Garrett,
an article.
Garrett, that was your point that the people on the left side should get guns if that's what they're worried about. Okay,
Agreed.
sure, do it. It's your right.
Well, explain what I discovered. Donald Trump did think about invoking the Insurrection Act 3 times. In 2020, in the George Floyd riots, took office in January 2025 for the border, and also during the LA riots and the Minneapolis riots. He did not want to or attempt to invoke the Insurrection Act on or around January 6th. What is true is a number of his supporters were asking him to invoke the Insurrection Act, to which he pushed back and he said he was not going to do it. There's no evidence that I can find anywhere that he attempted to invoke the Insurrection Act to keep himself in office or do even take steps or even tell people around him that was his intention. I can find nothing, no references of that.
I'll get you a reference. So, Kerry, go ahead.
All right. So I had one point and then a question for you, Garrett, after, if that's okay. So the first point is this distinction between defensive and offensive arms. And the only distinction is in how you use them. Oftentimes you hear people refer to the AR-15, the black rifle, right? Scary looking. As being this indiscriminate mechanism of mass murder and destruction, right? And a weapon of war. Well, here in Seattle, every police cruiser has an AR-15 in it. Now, all of a sudden it's the go-to choice of law enforcement when defending people against people who wish to, cause harm to other people. And the police, yes, they use 30-round magazines in each of their rifles. Because if there are multiple bad guys, you can't necessarily guarantee you're going to hit one with each shot and put them down, right? Even the military trains 5 shots for each person, right? So, and under stress, can you guarantee you're going to hit somebody? What if they're on drugs? There's a lot of accounts of people getting shot multiple times and not going down, until they bleed out, if.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the choice of weapon it depends on how you're using it. Anyway, the question I have for you is you were talking about if a bad thing happens in a country, restrict the arms, gun violence goes down. But I'm going to reverse this. Is why did the rate of shootings go up in the United States in the 50s? the rate of gun homicides was something like 4.5 per 100,000, and then it peaked at somewhere over 10. That's a huge shift. And what I'm wondering is, I mean, Sean brought up this idea of focusing on mental health, which I see no downside to. I mean, hallelujah, that's a great idea. But what I'm wondering is, what do you think the shift was where I can go, I went to high school, people had guns in their cars and nobody shot each other. What changed?
Well, I think the level of extremism in America has changed. Like when we were young and I had news bulletins in my high school saying, please remember to lock your rifles in your car because, they need to be locked up. You can't just leave them ready for anyone to grab. So it wasn't a big deal. There were no school shootings. You didn't have, 8-year-old children getting shot to death by people who had what I will call extreme misunderstandings, and I think the level of extremism, if you look at, there was a great post on social media talking about Eisenhower's um, Eisenhower's platform. And a lot of Eisenhower's platform is exactly, it was like strong, strong collective bargaining for unions. It was like improved Social Security and Medicare. It was literally the current Democratic Party's like platform was used by Eisenhower in the 50s. And so now, like the Republican Party has gone so extremist right wing that it's unrecognizable from any other country on earth how far the Republican Party has moved our political dialogue to the right. That literally the people who were on the right in the 50s are now the left of America. So, this is what's changed since our childhood, and it's been changing since the 50s. And unfortunately, I would like to say, I like to say extremism is a extremely poor wisdom. Like extremism is bad, and we are embracing extremism in the highest halls of power in America.
Garrett, can I try and take a nonpartisan hack at this and
I
say
already
I
did
think
that, but go
social
ahead and
media.
make your own.
You said extremism on the Republican side. I think this is much more of a
But I gave
social
a
media, the advent of that
I gave a
itself.
very tangible example of how the right in the 50s is now the left of the 2020s. So it wasn't a partisan perspective. I was pointing out that America's political dialogue of the Overton window has shifted from the 50s so that the people who used to be right wing are now considered left wing, and the right wing today is like literally considered like extremists across everywhere else in the world. Anywhere that looks at America, our right wing is considered extremists.
Well, I mean, there's many people who were on the left wing, like myself. I consider myself to be a 90s liberal who, the Overton window has expanded, I think, in both directions here. But that being said, I think social media itself has given rabbit holes for extremists. I would agree with you in that way. I also think it's creating large areas of social isolation, which is really ironic considering it's social media, but of people who feel like they're lost, they don't have any purpose, that life's going by them, and there's kind of this nihilistic tendency that, well, I'm going to commit suicide. I'm going to take as many people with me as possible. Less support, less understanding. And I think those type of things are factoring in with higher amounts of violence as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. I like to say text is the worst way to communicate. And most people are communicating more often in text than they are like this face to face. And even in this meeting, how many of us are on video? A very small portion of us. And yet, like, that's how we connect. We connect through nonverbal cues, and 80% of communication is nonverbal. At least here we get tone of voice. In text, you don't even get that. So it's like, imagine if you only read 10% of what someone, or, 20% of what someone wrote to you in text. You'd have no idea what they're saying. Well, that's what's really happening when you communicate in text to other people. You're only seeing 20% of what they're communicating because tone of voice, body language, that's 80% of communication. And so I agree with you. I don't think it's social media itself. It's the fact that people communicate primarily through text now that's destroying social like relationships. People have fewer friendships now than they did 20 years ago almost across the board. Not obviously 100% of people, but the vast majority, the average number of friendships is way down. So, we are going to be doing an event in the next month or two called Speed Friending. So anyone that wants to come for that, if you want to make new friends, it's going to be fun. So that said, anyone have topic want to respond on that, or should we go to Peter?
Garrett, I can't read the article. It's gated, but the AI summary doesn't say what you said it says. It said exactly what I said it said, and that's outside influences tried to push him into the Insurrection Act, but he never wanted it for himself.
Let's not do Trump
Actually, it
anymore.
says it reports that Trump and his allies considered emergency measures, including invoking the Insurrection Act, quote unquote, declaring martial law, seizing voting machines, and using the military to rerun the election as possible ways to overturn. It was not that he was pushed by other people. It says it reports that Trump and then his allies, Paul, I know you don't like to hear it, but man, hold on, let me finish. Focus on seeking truth rather than agreeing with your confirmation bias. I know you'd like to say you don't support Trump, but you are misquoting what I literally wrote down, and I am quoting it verbatim to try to clarify your misunderstanding. Trump was behind this. He wanted to find a way to stay in power. He truly probably believed that the election was stolen from him, and so he wanted any and every way to stay in power.
Number one, your article, I can't read it because it's gated. And number two, the AI summary of the article, which the AI could read it, does not say what you said.
I literally quoted the AI summary of the article. I just quoted it. It says it reports that Trump and his allies considered emergency measures, including invoking the Insurrection Act, declaring martial law, seizing voting machines, and using the military to rerun the election, which is illegal. The military doesn't run elections, the states do.
Hey, gents, with respect, there's a bunch of other.
There are a lot of hands up,
This
Paul,
is not
but
a
I'm
Trump
sorry, but
conversation.
please,
I want to respond to what you wrote because you're wrong.
Paul, pay for the gated article. It'll be worth it. Just listen to it with an open mind and realize that you may have a misunderstanding. Peter, go ahead.
Hi. So
good to see you, man.
So there's a couple things that it's good to see you too. So the Trump debating aside, there's a couple things that came up, and there's a couple of questions from earlier that I had. I mean, on extremism,
one at a time, Peter, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Yes, I will try to be coherent. Sorry.
And let's try to keep it to less than 1 minute per question because we have like 8 hands up and 10 minutes.
So just a comment then on extremism. I think there were probably plenty of people here who saw a lot of celebration on Charlie Kirk's death, which was a gun violence death, right? And that was kind of a wake-up call for a lot of people. And there's certainly some debate there, maybe on like whether there's more left-wing versus right-wing violence. But I think the capacity to celebrate the deaths of political rivals or people who disagree with you is probably high on both sides, I would say. And I think that's fair given how polarization is right now. Now, the question that came up from before is, I think I agree that this is primarily like a mental health and probably a criminal justice problem. But even if you take guns away, and if you look at like the killing of Vernia Zarutska, where this guy was arrested 14 times, he likely had schizophrenia, he was let out and he stabbed her in the neck, right? Or at least I believe it was the neck. So a lot of people, I will say on the center and the right, I would guess, view the left as having really naive ideas about the criminal justice system. And like you can let someone like this out indefinitely and give them 100 chances and everything will be okay. So my first question is like, what is the response to that idea? And who do you see actually like doing anything about like mental health issues or the criminal justice problem? Because you see, I believe the DSA wants to abolish prisons essentially. So
that's a separate issue, and we're 40 minutes over, Peter, so I'm going to jump
Go
in.
ahead. Go ahead.
So the Democrats actually put forward a mental health bill that would have improved mental health across the country in schools at all ages, and Republicans voted it down. So if you want to know who's focusing on mental health, it's very clear that liberals are focusing on mental health. Republicans are focusing on preventing all kinds of healthcare, including mental health coverage. So there's a very clear party lines answer to that question. Anyone have other comments or questions?
I would just say to Peter's question, I think the Zaruska case, for people who are violent offenders who get, I think bail reform that's allowing violent offenders, repeat offenders to be released, that's the problem. We just need a system where if we identify people who are a danger to the community, they shouldn't just be released, to have these type of tragic things happen. We had a similar thing happen in Chicago on the Blue Line where someone threw flammable liquid on her and lit her on fire, and it turned out the guy had been arrested I think it was 18 times before. It was something really high. So I think that's both mental health and criminal justice reform.
And if we go down that route, the perception is that those are more liberal people who are doing that. Would you agree or disagree? Or without having a million sources, without yes. So the perception is that the liberal policies lead to, hey, this guy was arrested 93 times, but let's let him out.
Right, he's a victim of the system, that type of thing.
Yes.
Well, the truth is actually, if you look at our event on recidivism, and we're getting onto multiple subjects here, but if you look at our event on recidivism, it was Republicans that changed our criminal justice system from reform-based to punishment-based that caused the huge spike in crime in the 70s that continues on to this day. The only thing that helped it was the fact that abortion was legalized, and 20 years after that, when the kids that didn't want, parents didn't want, ended up not being born, crime rates dropped a bit. But it's a little more nuanced. And I want to let Victoria go because we do have a bunch of hands up from people. Go ahead, Victoria.
Thank you. So thank you so much, Sean and Garrett, for this presentation. It kind of painted a different picture from what I was expecting. And I also appreciate Sean's desire and your perspective that any kind of gun regulations would affect the underprivileged groups more. However, the fact that, having more guns and giving guns to everybody, it just, it increases the availability of guns in the legal market, but that influences the supply on the illegal market as well, because a lot of those guns are sold, stolen, or somehow, transitioned on the illegal guns market. And just I'm in Toronto, and just, for a little bit of context, from 2020 to 2025, 73% of firearms used in violent crime in Toronto were smuggled from US. So, it's also impacting, your neighbors around the world. And last point is that I understand the whole, historical and cultural, nuance with gun ownership in US. However, the, hallmark of a civilized society is a resolve.
Sorry, go ahead, Victoria.
Resolve conflicts without violence, right? So maybe a better kind of thing to strive for would be to learn how to communicate without resorting to violence rather than distributing firearms. Thank you.
Well, I have an interesting response to that, because I hear these arguments all the time about, well, we want less violence. But I get statistics that show, well, guns are causing this and that violence. There's more and more people getting into situations with illegal guns or suicide or accidental misuse of a gun. But where are the statistics that show that there are criminals who decide, I don't think I'm going to enter that house because the person might have a gun? We don't have those numbers. And they, so they never get quoted. So how much crime would we have if all of a sudden criminals decide nobody has a gun, I can break into any house I want? There's, those numbers never show up. So we're always getting this skewed discussion about what is safe and how guns are dangerous, but we don't know about how many times people have been saved from having to deal with a criminal because maybe the homeowner has a gun. I mean, it's a real problem. And the debates are just really skewed most of the time.
Well, Jason, that's why I mentioned in my presentation the amount of defensive gun uses. And let me agree with you, Victoria, that a gun should be the last resort. It should only be something that's coming out when you know discussion and all other conflict resolution has failed at that point. But I don't want to be naive and think though that there aren't people who are willing to victimize other people. And the positive thing about a gun in even though there's, like you say, you're going to have more and more guns, especially in a country that where you have a Second Amendment and everyone has the right to get a gun so long within certain limitations. The gun is an equalizer. So if if a smaller woman is walking home at night and a much larger group of men decides they want to victimize her, without a gun, she's at their mercy. With a gun, she can drive them off and defend herself. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword here. But with that, like you say, you get a black market and you have to deal with that issue as well. But I don't think a mandatory buyback or gun regulations are going to stop people who are willing to buy guns on the black market to begin with. So, it's a tough situation.
I do want to answer Jason's question because it's been studied. Neighborhoods with higher rates of gun ownership actually have higher rates of residential burglary because firearms are expensive and easily sold on the black market. A home owner suspected to have a gun becomes a more lucrative target for thieves. There's no deterrence on occupied homes. The study found that higher local gun prevalence did not reduce the proportion of hot burglaries, indicating that the threat of an armed homeowner does not fundamentally change burglary entry problems. And case in point, Japan has one of the lowest rates of gun ownership and also one of the lowest rates of burglary, whereas the US has much higher rates of both. So that's anecdotal, I mean statistical because they're whole countries, but the research is the research and it's peer reviewed. I can give the study by the National Bureau of Economics.
I still don't buy these arguments because we don't know how many other homes could have been burglarized.
Jason, I would encourage you to read the study, and let's go to.
I probably won't.
I know you won't because you're focused on confirmation bias, Jason. And confirmation bias is when you ignore anything that doesn't agree with your current beliefs. That is the enemy of mankind, Jason, and it will be your enemy in some way, shape, or form.
The thing is, in the rural areas, everybody has a gun, and we have almost no crime.
I'm just telling you, this has been studied by peer-reviewed research, and while your anecdote might be true, it's not statistically studied or accurate unless it actually goes through a process of scientific experimentation. And so
they're not interested, I guess. I don't know what to tell you.
I know, because Jason, the problem is if you want to learn new things, you have to look for reasons you're wrong, not reasons you're right. If you ignore all evidence that doesn't agree with where you're right, then you're always going to think you're right, and you're going to have so many misunderstandings because you never change your opinions about areas you have misunderstandings.
The problem is, I think you're having this problem. I
Jason,
think you're
I'm
having
the one
the problem.
citing peer-reviewed research.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. I just don't buy it. Sorry.
I know, but Jason, I gave a very balanced perspective on whether or not I agreed with gun ownership. I'm not even against gun ownership at all. I think people should be able to own guns. I think more liberals should own guns because I think we need to get ready for Trump not stepping down in 2028. And I want to see the liberal states have way more gun ownership, and I want to see us crush this autocracy that's about to rise. And I want to see the military try to defend democracy and the Constitution. So I'm not against gun ownership, Jason. I just know for a fact that, and I didn't know until you raised the point, Jason. I didn't have an opinion on what you said. What you said made logical sense to me, so I challenged my confirmation bias in agreeing with you, and I looked up whether or not it had been studied and looked for specific examples, and actually it's been studied, and you're wrong. And if you want to prove yourself right, you need to commission a study that tries to take a more objective perspective and shows that the current researchers did it wrong. And the way to start with that is to read the study. Now, if you want to keep believing you're right about your misunderstandings, you can continue to do that into your grave, but you will suffer for the misunderstandings. No one else will suffer like you.
Okay,
that
well,
said,
I just have
Did
to
you read the
say
study? Did you
ditto.
just find it
I just
Yeah,
have
I
to
think
say
we're going to
ditto.
move past this.
so go ahead, Jenna. Dawn, if you don't mind, because Jenna hasn't gone yet, I want to let Jenna go, and then Fred, because you and Carrie have spoken, and so I want to let the people that haven't spoken go, and it's almost 9 o'clock, so we're gonna have to close up soon.
Yeah, thanks, Garrett. Yes, I think I'm just gonna try to offer a nuanced approach or perspective here because the Philippines, I think it's kind of like absent in this kind of discussions because the gun violence that we are experiencing here, such as like the frequency of public mass shooting, just like in other countries, is relatively low, and I think if we were going to be comparing that to Brazil or Mexico or Colombia or even the United States, and there it is arguably low. I could post a study on that, but also because like there is like a complicated relationship between the gun ownership and the gun violence here, since the licensing here and ownership is really expensive for people. It is not something that like a normal a person or even like a minimum wage earner will going to be able to afford, also as well as the licensing and other even like the permit to even carry it, because there is a separate permit as well in order to carry it. So I don't, but then again, I'm not really arguing that like we have a lower crime rate here because of that. But like there are other means that like people are creating or doing crime in which they will gonna be using knives and other forms of weapons. But I think that's a separate story with that. And I heard that of course Japan was like being used as an example here. So I think they have a distinct culture as well, and somehow also have more tighter rules as well with the gun ownership. But so as like Switzerland, they have like high gun ownership as well, but they also have like lower gun homicide alongside, because they have like extensive training and licensing and social condition from different countries. So I guess like those are just like parallels that I wanted to bring up. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree, Jenna, but the research that I mentioned was actually focused on the US specifically, and so it looked at the US in areas where there were more guns and less guns, and it found that where there were more guns, there were actually more burglaries because the guns were considered a thing that you could steal that was worth a lot of money. And so it seemed like people were more likely to rob when there were more guns. And so yeah, it was kind of the opposite of Jason's hypothesis, even though he doesn't agree with it. So
I think I agree with you on that, Garrett, because I think that that is something that like the US has an advantage compared to the Philippines, though, because as I mentioned,
yeah,
owning a gun here is really not something that everyone could afford,
right.
even like having the licensing. It's just like it's really expensive for people to have that. So I guess like where I'm going here is that I guess like it's just more nuanced. Thanks.
Thanks, Jenna. Good to hear from you. Salamat. Fred, you're the next person that I don't think has spoken yet, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. Thanks for calling me, Garrett. This has really been useful. A lot of good insights from people. I'd like to focus on the possibility of compromise solutions, with the caveat that first, I recognize that any restriction on gun ownership will be more full of holes than Swiss cheese. And secondly, specifically regarding gun ownership for the purposes of hunting, anything that restricts ownership of guns for the purpose of hunting in rural US is DOA, because it's so ingrained in the culture that even if it could be forced through, the probable result would be a spike upwards in gun ownership in those quarters. So specifically looking at that, I wonder if there's a possibility of more creative solutions. And I'm thinking, for example, of a restriction on rifle ownership for the purpose of hunting in urban areas only, restriction but not a ban, whereby if somebody in a city wants to go hunting with a rifle, they would need to stop by their local gun range and pick up a rifle that they are sequestering at that gun range for that purpose, and then return it. I'm thinking there the model would be like the Old West, probably the highest incident of gun ownership would be the Old West. And yet, I wouldn't say cities, towns would and did restrict gun ownership, where if you enter the town, you have to surrender your gun and you pick it up again when you leave. So I wonder if there is even the slightest possibility of a compromise solution that would be tolerable to both sides. Probably not, but one can hope. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a good suggestion. I found some statistics on the topic. In 1999, 49% of U.S. gun owners cited hunting as the main reason they owned a firearm. By 2013, it had dropped to 32%. And then something like only 15.6% of firearms are actually traditional hunting rifles. And then I think only, what was it, 4% or so of 4.5% of the total population actively hunted with a firearm in 2021. So about 14.1 million Americans. So some interesting statistics there. That said, I want to let Mike go, and then I'll see Dawn and Carrie. My daughter keeps telling me to put her to sleep. So, Mike, go ahead.
Hi, Garrett. It's good to meet you. I don't think I've really met you before.
No, good to meet you too.
Yeah, you seem like a highly intelligent and successful guy. And from your more recent interaction, sounds like you really do your research and you get into the studies and you change your mind on the basis of different things that you find and come to different positions. I'd like to pitch you a hypothetical.
Sure.
Let's say that you or any similar sort of person does some really good research and does a good job of arriving at some good policy that seems very likely to lead to some good outcomes. But then we kind of check the Constitution and read into the Second Amendment and how it's being interpreted, and that turns out to be unconstitutional. What do you do at that point?
So, I would argue that our Supreme Court has proven itself to be majority opinion activist judges. And so when you say that it turns out to be unconstitutional, I went through why the Second Amendment existed historically and what its purpose was. And it was really to protect the states from a tyrannical federal army. We already have that. We don't have real state armies or militias anymore that have any meaningful power. We talked about the active reserves in California being 1,500 people. What are 1,500 people going to be doing against the U.S. military? Pretty much nothing. So the whole purpose that the Second Amendment was written for, if you're actually an originalist, is, almost irrelevant today because we've already fallen prey to the very thing the Second Amendment was supposed to protect us from. So, if you're going to have a couple of activist judges who were put there, two of whom were put there through, or at least one of whom was put there through lying, cheating, and stealing, we can't place a Supreme Court justice in an election year. Boom, next election, we can't leave a Supreme Court seat empty in an election year. I mean, that's obvious hypocrisy that none of us should be putting up with, but people who just want to win put up with hypocrisy as long as their team is winning. And as long as that happens, our democracy is at threat. And so, to answer your question, just because the Supreme Court says that giving money is free speech, I don't buy it. Because if giving money is free speech, we already know that free speech isn't taxable. So if free speech isn't taxable and giving money is free speech, well, none of us should be taxed for any money that we make, no matter how we make it, because we're just getting free speech from our employers. And there I just defunded the US government with our brilliant Supreme Court majority's opinions. These people are not smart or they're not ethical. And we know because it took them many months of public pressure to even create an ethics paradigm or like an ethics set of rules that would govern them because they got huge amounts of pressure because they had none. And they're getting hundreds of millions of dollars in gifts from people who are they are like seeing the court cases of like our Supreme Court is bought and sold just like our government is bought and sold, and it is unfortunate, but trust me, I do not care one lick about the Supreme Court Republican majority's opinion on what's constitutional or not. They have absolutely no legitimacy and they should all be removed, because they're most of them actually lied under oath. I know Kavanaugh lied under oath. I know Clarence Thomas lied under oath. So these people are not, they're either not intelligent or they're not ethical, and either one of those reasons should keep them from continuing on the Supreme Court. And we know that what they've done there is complete activist judgeship types of things. So first of all, thank you for your kind words in the beginning, and I'm sorry if my response is harsh and maybe not what you wanted to hear, but like we have to care about who's on this court. This is the highest court in the land, and the fact that they're getting hundreds of millions of dollars of quote unquote gifts from people whose cases they're presiding over and not recusing themselves of, that should really bother everybody. And the fact that no one is making us think about this is really problematic for our democracy as a whole. The fact that no one's making us think about half of Republicans saying Trump should run in 2028 is actually even worse.
Can I respond briefly?
Of course, please.
Sure. So I want to reiterate, you are very much a smart guy, and I generally do think that you're pretty good at pursuing good policies that'll have good outcomes. If I can try and summarize your response a little, it Sure. Kind of seems like you're saying you're basically just pursuing good policies, and we don't really have a mechanism that allows us to properly determine if something is constitutional or not. So we're kind of not really doing that, or at least that's not the focus.
No, I'm sorry if I gave that impression. We do have a mechanism. Unfortunately, because we have put onto the Supreme Court activist judges, which is very ironic because the Republicans have been calling all the liberal judges activist judges, but actually the activist judges on the Supreme Court are the Republicans, and they have all lied under oath. They lied under oath about Roe v. Wade, or they refused to answer questions that they were asked under oath while they were being interviewed. But most of them gave the impression that they would never overturn Roe v. Wade, and then they did. The very people who committed, verbally in a way that every reasonable person would interpret as saying they would not overturn Roe v. Wade, they did overturn Roe v. Wade. So if you consider omission a lie, they all lied under oath, so they should all be removed. We have the right checks and balances. The problem is they're not checking and balancing because no one's holding Trump accountable for the things that he's doing. He's mentally unfit. The people behind him are not the ones that we should be relying on to put people in power. And so we have real problems in America. We have the rise of autocracy that is mirroring, like step by step, the rise of Nazi Germany, to the tune of an insurrection, except Hitler went to jail and Trump didn't for the insurrection. So we didn't even get that part right. I blame the Democrats for that because they should have put Trump in jail for what he did. But the truth is, Hitler only got more popular when he went to jail, and maybe they knew that, and that's why they didn't do it. I don't know. But all I can say is that I think we need to abide by the Constitution. I think it's super important. But I think the last people we should be having interpret the Constitution are the conservative Supreme Court judges. They're inept at interpreting the Constitution. They're absolute failures. An average person on the street that went to community college, that was top of their class in community college and worked hard, I would put on the Supreme Court before any one of those conservative judges, because I think that person would have much more of a chance of having integrity than any of the Supreme Court justices on the bench.
Where's your research?
I can give you, I can look, Jason, join the Discord community. I have posted this in the past. I did an event on the Supreme Court justices and I talked about all of the abuses. It's all cited. I have lots of studies. I have lots of articles from news sources on all this stuff. It's all there. If you want it, but I have a feeling, Jason, because it doesn't agree with what you want, you won't actually watch the.
No. I'm talking about logic. Don't talk about my feelings.
I'm not talking
I
about your
think this
feelings.
needs to be taken offline. Yeah, this needs to be taken elsewhere.
So, Jason, if you want to talk about logic, I gave the logic of how Citizens United defunds the entire U.S. government. That was the logic. That said, I do want to let Dawn go because she's the last person with her hand up that has waited very patiently, and then I'm going to have to put my kids to sleep.
Thank you.
I apologize. I got emotional there, so that was my fault. And that was one of my rules, is not to get emotional. So I consider myself guilty, self-punished, self-flagellated. So thank you, Don. Would love to hear from you.
Thank you. I'm making notes of the points that was brought up by previous speakers. When I first commented, I talked about the social economics when it comes to guns. Sean gave the example of, how can a lady walk home alone on the street and protect herself, if she has no weapons. And, with handgun being about $500 just for the gun itself, not counting all the associate costs and everything like that, that is not affordable. So the lady who's poor, who can afford the gun, can't protect herself. Only the person who can afford the gun can afford to protect themselves. So to me, that's a social economics issues. As a means for protection, we talk about, again, the same example, a person should have a gun, whether they're out on the street alone at night or in the mall, at the school or something like that, they should be able to protect themselves with a gun. But we don't talk about the other options, all the tools beside guns to protect one. Women can carry, a lot of times women, because I am one, when I travel to go to where a lot of clubs and there's down here there's nightclub and things like that. I don't carry guns, but I actually carry gel pepper spray, and I taught myself awareness of what to look for. Can that be something taught, self-defense class as a public service, not just I had to pay $100 to go to some class, have it somebody else. So that's the mean protection when it's gun is used as an argument of protection. There's other ways to protect. Now, talking about mean protection for the mass, talking about, the right to bear arms to protect ourselves from tyrannical governments. Nowadays, I don't think guns is the most effective thing. It's something that's a good argument as a weapon to protect ourselves from tyrannical governments. It has been proven since 2016 that the most effective weapon is not guns. It's online warfare. The propagandas, the broken down of the American people, the file marriages and parents talk to the kids and the families falling apart is not because of guns. The Americans, I think, as a whole, is broken from the inside. It's not because of guns. We are killing ourselves, literally, in some cases, because of online warfare. It's what says in the news, on the internet, and things like that. And with the war in Ukraine, gun is not the thing that's being talked about. It's about bombs and drones and bombs.
Yeah.
So I don't think that is, again, not a good argument as a mean to bear arms anymore. I mean, for us civilians to properly protect ourselves is to hoard up on bombs and drones and a very strong cybersecurity force. On the point of mental health, talk about kids who are affected. Again, this is tied to social economics as well. Is that I think a lot of time, I think the media don't have all the details of the mental conditions of the kids or the teenagers or the young men that committed violence or their true mental health status. A lot of these kids or males, well, one or two, there are a few cases of females, a lot of them came from broken home. And when we think of mental health, we think it's nature, but it's not nature. Sometimes it's nurture. And based on the stories I read in details, like the story of that kid that whose the parents ultimately got held responsible. Even his case, there's a mental neglect there. There's no abuse that we know of, but there's neglect. So again, I think it's not just like the depression thing. It is depression, but it's a nurture situation, not a nature. And if we're going to talk about mental health, then we should also look at 20 years of wars that we brought back. A lot of vets came home broken, and so
try to finish your thought, Dawn. Sorry, I have to get my kids to bed. They usually
that's all right. Sorry. Thank you.
A lot earlier. So I want to agree with you on teaching people self-defense. I think that should be part of our school system, like Krav Maga or jujitsu, like, things that are, that give someone that would normally have a disadvantage, especially women who have a muscular disadvantage against men, to be able to use jujitsu uses your enemy's weight against them, and Krav Maga is like pressure points. And so those things can help someone who is weaker be effective at someone who is stronger, and heavier. Now, I agree with you that the most effective weapon is not guns, and I'm dismayed by the social harm that I would argue text communication has caused, as well as online warfare. And there has been foreign government involvement in trying to sow the seeds of discord in the U.S. amongst our citizenry. There was also clear involvement by Russia and Iran and China in our U.S. elections. And as far as having U.S. citizens stock up on bombs and drones, like I said, I don't think the average person, can buy bombs, nor would they know how to use them in combination with drones to cause any harm against the government. So I really think our best weapon, and you can see my devil's horns, so I guess you shouldn't trust me. But you can see that the best weapon that we really have is to come together as society for the values of truth and fairness. I just put another chat in the link, or link in the chat, about the FTI, because we are trying to solve that problem of social, social. Just 1 minute, I'm almost done. So hold on, just 1 minute, 2 minutes. So to create unity and a united front across all people, where, look, we've disagreed tonight. Sean and I disagree about lots of stuff, but we also agreed about probably more than we usually do, Sean, if I'm not mistaken. And yet, we can still be friends, right? And I think it's really important that we have a line in the sand where we say, look, this is our Constitution and we need to protect it. And it worries the heck out of me. And I didn't know that statistic, that 50% of Republicans say that Trump should run in 2028. That scares the heck out of me, right? That's scary, because Republicans have guns way more than Democrats, but more importantly, the military is vast majority Republican. And so if the vast majority of the military thinks that Trump should be running in 2028, what's going to happen? Is he going to step down? Because I did post an article that said he really talked about saying, look, we're going to use all options possible, including have the military run elections federally, which is not how our elections are supposed to be run according to the Constitution. We know that he said that everyone is meddling with the elections, but the only person we know that has meddled with the elections is Trump, when he told Georgia on a recording to find the votes to get him to be the president, right? We know he's meddled with the elections. He's tried everywhere he could to meddle with them. So our democracy is at risk. And the fact that we as a society can't unite around the fact that this guy is harmful to democracy scares the heck out of me. Look, I love all human beings. I really do. I have what's called agape. I care about every human being, including Trump. Even though I disagree strongly with him, I care about him. I just think that he's causing a lot of significant unnecessary harm, and he should be removed from a position of power. And I think he should be removed immediately from a position of power. But whether or not that happens, which is very unlikely because Republicans are afraid of him, I know that he should be removed from his position of power after the end of his term. And the fact that we can't, as an American society, come to a vast majority agreement of at least that is very scary. So I really hope that people will focus on seeking truth and fairness rather than focusing on, is my team winning and what can I do to get my team win? Trump is really good at rallying the troops. He's just not good at running a society. And if you look at all of our other events, we've talked about a lot of his policy decisions, and so I won't rehash those, especially because I got to get my kids to bed. But I do want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Thank you guys for the thoughtful discussion, for the various opinions. I don't expect anyone to agree with anyone, including me, unless you believe it to be true of your own free will and volition. I want you all to think for yourselves. I want us all to think for ourselves. And all I would encourage you to do is listen with an open mind, hone your critical thinking skills so you can better discern fact from fiction and wisdom from folly, and transparently share your beliefs with other people and then listen to what they have to say. So that said, everybody have a great night. I hope to see you guys next week. And I think we're talking about transgenerational trauma and whether or not we can do something about it. And secret, yes, we can do something about it, and we should. And so if anyone, if that is the topic for next week, which hopefully I'm remembering right, but my memory's not the best. So what's that?
Wait,
What's that, Rick?
sorry.
No problem. All right. So everyone have a great night. Thanks for coming and hope to see you guys next week.
Thanks
All
for
right,
the discussion,
thanks.
Garrett. Appreciate it.
Thanks. You too.